Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz. Hi, Richard. Welcome to Plot Twist Radio.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Before we get going, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah, I'm Richard Moon. I'm a screenwriter, film producer, and now novelist. I've been working in independent film for about 15 years or a little bit more. And I am primarily a writer, but I've worked at every level of film, and I just put out my first novel last year in November of 2025. It's called To Conquer Death, and it's a historical horror fantasy about the Bronze Age collapse in ancient Egypt and the surrounding area.
Love that. And congratulations on the publication. That's always
Thank you.
fun.
Thank you.
So, as you said, you're a screenwriter, an award-winning screenwriter.
Yeah.
How does writing a novel compare to writing for the screen?
It's a lot more words. I mean, that's the simplest way to put it, but it is a lot more words. With screenwriting, I always like the format because it's very concise. You have to get as much description in as few words as possible because space on the page matters for time on the screen. You know, if you have a 300-page script, that's going to take forever to shoot, and also, it's going to get a lot of things are going to get edited. But at the same time, it's very active. It's always in present tense. It's always very, visual in terms of what you see on the screen. And that's always a fun way to write. And in switching back over to prose, I should say, not, I used to write prose back in the day, but now I'm getting back into it. The big change for me was realizing that I could not I half joke about this. I couldn't rely on the set designer and the costume designer to, fill in their parts of the of the descriptions. It's like I had to say, "Yes, this is what it looks like." I had to paint the visual picture, for the reader in a way that you don't have to in a screenplay, and that you in a lot of ways you shouldn't in a screenplay because you're there to describe the action and the character and not get in the way of what other people in the crew are gonna do because, it's a very collaborative effort, a film. Whereas a book, it's all on you. If you're not figuring out what that person is wearing, then the reader does not know what they're wearing, period. At the same time, I found it does open up a lot of freedom because it's not that time sensitive element that screenplays have. There's a rule of thumb that one page of screenplay is roughly 1 minute of film, and that doesn't hold true for individual pages. It's just kind of an aggregate thing. But it does have that sense of it. You can't spend 4 paragraphs describing a room because you've now messed up the timing on the script. You got to get in and out and move on. Whereas with the novel, it's like, oh, I can just the time between one line and the next is, a split second in the narrative, but I can use that time to go inside of people's heads and, really dive into why they're thinking what they're thinking in that moment. And the freedom that opened up for me was like, oh, this is why this is fun and people do this all the time. It was very much like I get to indulge in having time that a book is not, one page after another is 1 minute after another. It's like, no, this chapter can take, 15 seconds and it's an entire chapter. The next chapter might take 4 days, but it's just it and then they're the same length chapter, more or less. So yeah, it's been a fun little journey, and I'm really still a huge fan of both formats, and I'm doing a lot more writing in both realms.
That's awesome, and it's one of those things I think, and from everyone I've spoken to, once you start, you can't stop. Even, you can't leave one behind. You have to just press on with both at that point.
Yeah, 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 very much. Another nice thing is that I tend to be a very private person, as a lot of writers are, and so I do like being in my bubble and writing. But at the same time, man, I love the collaborative atmosphere of a film. If you can get a film made, then it's just such a joy to work with everybody else in getting it made. Um, and uh, the differences there have also been very intriguing to me that when you have a screenplay, that's the first step. And maybe that's never gonna get made and you're never gonna get to the next level. But once you have a manuscript, that's also the first step, but now you're on this journey that will get you to the end where it'll get out one way or another, you can get that sucker out. You don't need to put it together a team of 50 people to get it made. Yeah, so I like that a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. I would think I want to do my books as screenplays, but then I started looking into it. I was like, "Oh, that's a lot of work." I don't know about that.
But yeah,
But
and the adaptation can be really tough too. Because this book actually started off life as a concept for a feature film, and I wrote up the treatment, and when the pandemic started and shut everything we were doing down for a little bit, I looked at this treatment and I was like, "What was I thinking? This is never gonna be I can never turn this into a feature film. It's way beyond any budget level I could ever get made, at my level." And it's also there's too much stuff in it. It's so packed full of information. And so I was like, "Okay, let me try turning this into a book." And they are, like, monstrously different formats when it comes to the storytelling. So anytime I see a real successful book to film adaptation, it's extremely impressive, but more often than not, you see some book that you loved reading, and it's got turned into a movie, and you're like, "Well, they left out a whole bunch of stuff." It's like, "Well, of course they did, 'cause they're different formats." And going in the opposite direction is difficult too, and I've actually worked on both, so,
really,
yeah.
yeah, you bring up a good point there because most times people will say, "Well, the book is better," and it's like, well, as you said, you can't fit all of that into 2 hours or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and it's and they because they serve different purposes. So I recently saw Project Hail Mary, which I really enjoyed the book and I really enjoyed the movie, and they are vastly different because, yes, the book has a lot more detail and information and so on and so forth. But at the same time, the book can't give you that scene where he's standing on the hull of his ship in the Petrova line and it's just all of this color and light and he's having a moment. It can't give you that because it's not a visual representation. And the same thing, like I've read Dune a couple of times, and the fact what Denis Villeneuve managed to do with that adaptation is amazing. And at the same time, I'm the guy my family looks to be like, okay, so what did they leave out of this? Because I'm not quite understanding. I'm like, okay, so 10,000 years ago, I'm the guy who can give them the information. But at the same time, the book doesn't give you that those scenes, the visuals and the soundscape and everything getting put together, and even, Timothy Chalamet just grabbing a hold of his audience and bringing them along with him. Those are all great things that you can only get in a movie that you can't get in a book. So they're different formats, and I find the best adaptations are the ones that are like, "This is a movie, we're making a movie. We're not worried about being strictly, faithful to the book because the book's doing its own thing, and the book stands on its own, and the movie needs to stand on its own as well."
Yeah. So to conquer death, what pulled you in that genre?
So I've always been kind of a fan of horror and, a lot of historical fiction. I've always been a huge fan of alternate history where it's like especially from, like, Harry Turtledove and his contemporaries where it's like, here's, what history might have looked like if things had gone slightly differently. And, with this, it really started off with me, like, reading a Wikipedia page about the Bronze Age collapse and how little we know about this actual historical event that destroyed several civilizations that were superpowers of their age. And, from there, I started reading, other, books about the history, especially Eric Klein's, 1170 BC, the year the world ended, I think was the subtitle, but 1170 BC. It's a great book that again goes into what we know and what we don't know about this time period. And so often the way my brain works is I'll see something like that that'll be like, "Oh, that's interesting. We don't know. It's a question. Well, what if it's this?" And I'm like, that's always like the jumping off point. And in this case, it was, there were these series of invasions that we know a little bit about from the sea peoples and that destroyed a bunch of these civilizations. But we don't know exactly where they came from. We don't know if they're the things that actually destroyed the civilizations. We only have basically a little bit of archaeology and two stelae from two Egyptian pharaohs that both say, "Hey, these people showed up I beat them, aren't I great? I'm wonderful. And so the real question to me was like, well, what if these weren't invasions in the way we usually think about invasions? What if they were refugees? What if they were running from something worse coming up behind them? And it's the worst that you actually had to deal with. And then, then I had the setting and the basic conflict, but I didn't have the characters, and that took me another while before I was like, who are the people that have to deal with this thing? And I started building a nice little family unit that is dealing with both living through an apocalypse and, their own traumas.
Very interesting. I love that. And as a historian, I really love that. That is my favorite. I teach about just the ancient world, and it's kind of crazy because I'm a Civil War historian, which has nothing to do with the ancient world. But we do touch on that a little bit, the Bronze Age. And you're right. We don't really know hardly
Yeah.
anything about it. Yeah, like you said, archaeological stuff, but that's what they told us when I was going through to get my master's was, as a historian, you kind of have to interpret it and just kind of say this is what it was. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem very official, but okay.
No, and the best historians I've ever read are very clear about that problem too, that they're like, "This is what I think it is, but maybe not. I might be wrong on that." And it's like that ambiguity is very intriguing to me.
Wait, so where did the title "To Conquer Death" come from? It's huge. It's philosophical. What does it mean to you?
So I went through a lot of iterations on the title. I had a working title for a long time that just didn't work on any level, but it was a good working title for me to classify everything under. Um, and for a long time, I was trying to figure out what the core philosophical, not just theme, but like conflict going on with all of the characters involved was. And like a lot of writers, I tend not to know the theme until after I've written most of the piece. It's like almost the writing of it is how I figure out what the theme is, and then I have to like go back and make sure it fits and everything. And so I was bouncing through several titles, and nothing was quite sticking. At one point, I was calling it "Down to the North," which is because the Egyptians, when on the in the few times that they would actually make a map, the way their worldview was south was at the top and north was at the bottom because that's the direction that the river flows. And so I was like, that feels odd because it's putting you in the world that's not what we're used to, but it just doesn't work. But that one stuck along the longest. And then I was actually I was out for a walk and I was listening to the original cast recording of Jesus Christ Superstar, which is one of my favorite musicals. And there is a line in Or Jerusalem where towards the end Jesus says, to conquer death you only have to die. And I all of a sudden I that like hit me and I was like, oh, that's what everyone is working on. Because I had played with titles that included death too, because the characters all have a big part of their trauma is relating to how they deal with death, how they approach death, how they see their own deaths. And all of a sudden I was like, that's it in a nutshell. It's like, Dory is trying to run away from death, Typhon's running to death, uh, Kashay's like dealing out as much death as he can, and even the big bad is like his whole deal is about like trying to conquer death. So it's like, oh, and that's the title right there, to conquer death. That's what they're all trying to do, even if they don't realize they're doing it. And I got very excited, and I like told it to my writing group, and they all got very excited because they had all not liked any of the titles that I had too, and they were like, "Yes, that's the one that works." And yeah, it's just the way it's stuck and like shined through all of the ideas that I was trying to get across is still like it kind of blew my mind at the time, and I was like, "Yep, that's the title right there." Yeah,
It's a good one. That's one of the hardest parts, I think, as far as writing goes, is coming up with a title because it has to be
yeah.
catchy, but it has to be like, short and punchy at the same time. So, when you were writing it, did any of the characters or scenes surprise you? Like when I'm writing, I start with a vision in my head of how my character is going to be, but as it evolves, it seems like they kind of take on their own little personality, and we go in a completely different direction.
It wasn't until I was writing a section where Doria, who's barbarian from the wilds of untamed Europe, which wasn't even called Europe at the time. I was having her describe the two Egyptian brothers, her perception of them, and she didn't have their names, but she could see that they were brothers. She see they were talking, and it wasn't until that moment that I realized, "Oh, Typhon's significantly shorter than Koshe." I just like, out of nowhere, I was like, "Oh, yeah, he's the short one, he's the tall one." That's what she's calling them, and it really surprised me because I hadn't thought about their physical differences in that way, and by the same token, it wasn't until I was deep, deep, deep into the book, like, in the last quarter before I don't it's weird to say, I don't like to do that anthropomorphizing thing where the characters sit up and talk to you, but at the same time, there was a moment where I was like, "Oh, Typhon's asexual." Oh, I d he all of the little mannerisms that I had built into him suddenly, like, came together and just said, "Yeah, this is a guy who in the ancient world, there's no term for it, but he's like he's not, sexually attracted to anyone." I was like, "Yeah, that oh, that's why he's doing that thing earlier. That's why he's like that." Or, "Oh, okay." And, yeah, it was as if he, like, sat up and said, "Yeah, man, this is the way I am." And I'm like, "Okay, cool." So,
Yep.
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny how our minds work, I think, just to create these complex characters that basically have a life of their own. It's fun.
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite parts of writing.
yeah.
So what was one of the biggest challenges in blending ancient history, fantasy, and horror together?
It w it really was finding that line, of verisimilitude, of keeping the details of the world and the culture and everything as true to what they were and what we know of them as I possibly could, while also managing to fit in the bits and pieces I needed for, like, the fact that none of them spoke English, but I need them to speak colloquial modern English so that it's comprehensible to us. And I didn't wanna do the excessively heightened language thing, where every Roman has a British accent sort of sort of deal. I wanted it to because all my main characters are, like, commoner level. They're not kings, they're not princes, they're not at the high levels of society, so I wanted them to sound like, common people, but at the same time, there were times when I was like there was a word in English that I would have chosen to use in my own speech or in another character's speech, where I sat back for a second, I said, "Except that is one of those words that's, like, just the Latin root, barely changed, and can I use the Latin version, root of that word when it's still, 800 years before there's 600 years before there's a Rome?" It's like, no. So, and I had a whole bunch of things like that because, of course, English is filled with Latin roots and Greek roots and a lot of terms that we use that are just the Greek or Latin term. It's hard it was hard to, like, conceptualize having these ancient Egyptians or even these ancient barbarian Europeans who are speaking a Proto-Indo-European derived language to say something like having pathos for someone, which is just the Greek term. It's just straight up the Greek term, and it wasn't even laid down like that until Socrates and Plato. Several centuries later. So it's like now I have to figure out the way to say what I want to say, but use words that aren't just the Greek or the Latin or even the French, that I had to pull that apart. Whereas on the other side, the easy part was figuring out, like, how does the magic work? Well, it's like one thing Egyptians did is they described how magic works. They were very open and honest about that. So I was like, magic works the way the Egyptians say it works. When the Egyptians are doing magic, that's the way it works. Bing. I don't even have to world build very much on that. It's like,
Yes.
the priests say, "Hey, Khonshu, help us out with this journey," and Khonshu's like, "Got you. Here's a little wind. It works out." So,
Love
yeah,
it.
yeah.
That's the best part of fantasy. You could just
Hmm.
everybody can just go with it. I just come up with stuff and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. But you know what? People like it. And they do. So
Yeah,
that's what
yeah,
that's what
yeah,
makes
exactly.
fantasy amazing. As far as your book goes, for those that are just hearing about it for the first time, what can you tell them without giving away spoilers?
So it is, as I've said, set in the Bronze Age, during a period we know as the Bronze Age collapse. It's the New Kingdom of Egypt, right around 1190 BC, and it these two Egyptian brothers who've had tragedy in their past. Their father, went off to war and came back wrapped in linen. have grown into warriors themselves, and they've got their own issues. But as part of the Egyptian army, they defeat this invasion coming from across the ocean that was burning villages and stealing food. And what they discover when they defeat this army is that it's an army full of refugees. It's a bunch of people who are fleeing from something. And one of these refugees, Doria, manages to open a line of communication with the two brothers and let them know that they're refugees. But she's not looking for a handout. She just wants to keep running. She does not trust being around people. She despises the fact that she just got captured instead of can keep running. And when the pharaoh of Egypt says, "Okay, you two seem very important. The gods have kind of been talking to me. I want you to go back along this refugee route and figure out what's causing them to run. What's causing all these communication difficulties we're having with these other kingdoms." The two brothers decide to take Doria along with them as a guide, and she goes along with it on the idea that this would be a good way to escape and keep running. And she brings along another woman with her, Yaga, who is really desperately looking for almost a mother figure. That she's grown up. She's much younger than Doria, but she's grown up so far with her people on the run, and so she looks to Doria as like an elder, which is something Doria doesn't like. But at the same time, she's going to bring this girl along with her just in case they can make a break for it. And as they travel first to ancient Crete and see some disasters that are having them there, and then travel on to ancient Greece and see what's going on there, the four of them form a sort of impromptu little found family that is coming together and trusting each other and relying on each other in a way that none of the four of them thought they would or really is very comfortable doing. And after a huge disaster kind of befalls the whole expedition, it's the four up to the four of them to keep going up into the deep north and confront the thing that's coming after him and that's been driving Doria's people out of the woods for her entire life, that's threatening Kashe and Typhon's home with destruction. And they have to kind of like overcome their own traumas and figure out what their place in the world is in order to face what's coming.
Very cool. Very cinematic. I love it. Love that. So where can the audience find you and your book?
In August, I'm gonna be at the Worldcon in Anaheim, California, that's coming up, the World Science Fiction Convention. And then after that, I'll see. There's a few other places that I'm looking, but those are the big ones coming up.
Very exciting. And I will make sure that all of your links and whatnot are in the show notes. Thank you
Great.
so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.